It really explained a lot to me, at least, in terms of the perception that a lot of people in academia have regarding the purpose of their music within academia. Um, if you want to start with like the idea of just the academic institution kind of shielding people from criticism or at least from popular opinion, then that's pretty much what the purpose of academia was, other than higher education. It was to create a sort of insulated system where people could do the research and do the music that they wanted to do without really having it necessarily commercially viable. And I like when Milton Babbitt, and I have it up here, I like it when he says that they're creating a commodity which has little, no, or negative commodity value, and is in essence a vanity composer, which is pretty true. You know, pretty much every composer is a vanity composer. Um, However, I would say that even the most commercially unviable things, which have losses, can accrue commodity in the long run. You think about Einstein on the Beach, the seminal Philip Glass opera, which basically launched his career of being uh, what he is today. He was in the hole 30 grand by the time it was over. By the time the first run of the opera finished, he had to pay back $30,000 of putting it on. So he had to hop in a taxi and just start working until he got it paid off. But it's led to him being this ginormous composer with so much clout and staying power. So I just thought that was a very interesting point that he made about the commodity aspect of music.
Yeah, I would agree with that aspect of his essay. I mean, in that even if something doesn't have commercial value, I would say it can have value in other ways. Even if he didn't come back from that and was
Yeah,
just continually in debt, um, that does that that doesn't mean that his work didn't have value. It just maybe didn't have commercial value, And that another thing
right.
what you're saying about, universities shielding people um, from, well, it creates a space where you can create art where it doesn't necessarily have to be commercially viable, right? Which I think is a good
Yeah,
thing. I don't think commercial value is the only metric for something being good or of quality. Um,
right.
it's too bad that it's hard to sustain any kind of body of work if it's not commercially viable. At least if you live in the United States.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's an interesting question there. Like how else, like what determines quality or good art? I wouldn't place it all on having commercial value, but I guess that could be an aspect of it. Do you have an opinion on what determines good intent or quality within art, music?
Definitely. I don't really have an opinion on what creates quality or what creates value when it comes to art. I think the value is in both its creator and its audience, where something that has very little overall uh, commodity value, like something that either does not gain a lot of money or is not very popular, to a certain number of people, it is something that is very personal and very valued as something. Um, and it might be popular, it might not be popular, but at least for one person, it might be their entire world, and that's the person who created it. I do think that institutions implicitly apply value to something through its maintaining. I think that, for example, when one of the one of the professors at the Hart School, James Sellers, when he passed away, he was a former professor who worked there for a long time. When he passed away, there was a 4 concert series over the course of 4 nights. They have a portion of the library that's dedicated to his music. So there is both personal and artistic value in both him as the teacher and him as the composer. And I think that that is expressed by the efforts in which were exerted in order to maintain both his music as a sonic form for it to be performed in concert and as a tangible form to be maintained in a high quality standard. In terms of popularity, it's it's only to me popularity matters in the way in which it touches and connects to a overall audience. Something that I think should kind of touch an audience would be like jazz, particularly more of a swing or classic jazz era music. Something that really thrives on community and audience participation, either through dance or just through being active in the music. And I think that that is, of course, important if you have live performances, that you do have an audience which is there that is engaging with the music as much as the performers are engaging with it. I think in that regard, an audience is important, therefore a certain amount of popularity is important, but not in the sense that it validates or creates value for that musical, tangible art.
Yeah, I agree with that. That for music and certain performance art like dance, it kind of needs an audience um, to appreciate the realization of it. And I think in that way, his comparison of music to like mathematics and science doesn't really fit, um,
Hmm.
because it's there's not there's no real like direct comparison. There's not mathematics like theater or like um, I don't know. It doesn't seem, maybe I can't put it fully into words, but it doesn't seem like the comparison fits, wholly fits. Like in some ways it applies. And then also, um, things being popular in and of themselves doesn't make it meaningful or good. Like there's things that are popular, I don't know, drugs or heroin can be really popular, or various fast food um, restaurants or that sort of thing can be popular. Doesn't necessarily make it good. It just means that maybe it's getting uh, attention, or it just happens to be really prevalent, you know?
Yeah. Regarding the the attribution of music as it relates to like mathematics, like he was making the comparison of mathematics to music. I do see that as sort of touching on the very traditional way in which music is seen, for example, by the ancient Greeks, where music is seen as one of the mathematics, um, rather than one of the humanitarian sciences. Um, so I do see this sort of resurgence of the logical aspects of music and the, I guess I'll call the purely formulaic aspects of music. But I do think that, and I do agree with you, that popularity doesn't really mean value, because, of course, there are many unhealthy things that are popular, but they do really little community good, such as reality television. Very popular, very, very terribly bad for you, basically, visual junk food. I, I think that one of the issues I have with something like that, with something like what he's talking about, is music that doesn't really have a connection with the general public as a way of just giving up and saying that connection was severed a long time ago. Because he does talk about the fact that the divergence of music between the serious music and its listeners was the result of a half century of revolutionary musical thought, which most likely was incited by the rise of serialism at the turn of the 20th century, which is very much uh, a way in which you can write music in a very logical way, but it really needs to be learned, almost like Johann Sebastian Bach. You kind of need to learn how to listen to Bach. Some of his music, I mean, his music is phenomenal, but some of it doesn't come easy. So, in that way, I do think that one of the things he's talking about, which is that the separation between the audience and the contemporary music scene, was really this result of this revolutionary thought where it was just severed the connection. But it's the fact that there's not even an effort to try and remedy that, which I think is very much to the detriment of both the composer and the audience overall.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think even within the title, who cares if you listen, just gives kind of the front of kind of like an apathetic kind of outlook on it, just like giving up,
Mm.
that, yeah, maybe resulted from all those things that you were saying, just like, and also, having only his colleagues show up to these concerts and that sort of thing. So it's just maybe led to his kind of apathetic, like not caring about or trying to reach an audience. You can have complex work and then maybe just try and, by just shutting that down, you're not trying to open it up to more people. You're just like shutting it down. Like, it doesn't matter if you get it or not because you're not important. The audience doesn't matter. And it kind of, it disregards, I think the audience is important within music because
Yeah.
the realization of it, you have a performance and there's performers and they perform it in front of an audience. So it plays a role in the performance and the realization of the music. I guess it would depend on the piece. Like if it's just, if he's working purely like theoretical and just coming up with like theories and doing writing books and academic papers, I guess it doesn't matter if it's
Hmm.
a performance or not. But yeah, that was my initial contention with it, I guess. Is
Yeah.
that
I'd like to jump on that idea that you put forth, that sense of apathy and that sense of with the audience. Uh, and I think the one thing that he really addressed was that specific type of audience which wants to create a sense of value or attribute a sense of value to the music through either a critique of it or an analysis of it or just something that makes them define whether or not it's good or whether or not it's valid. I do have an experience with this. As I was leaving a concert of Brahms, one of the pieces they had on the program was his horn trio, which is a wonderful, beautiful piece. But in this case, the horn trio was not performed with the traditional instrumentation. This performance of the horn trio was with a viola instead of the horn. So it wasn't even a horn trio; it was a viola trio, I guess. Uh, but it was fine. So that was just one part of the program. It was fine, whatever. So I was leaving the concert hall, and I just happened to hear this conversation between two people, and one of the people made this statement that just blew my mind. They were talking to the other person. They said, the thing about Brahms is that he was never really writing for a specific instrument. And I I had the sensation to strangle somebody, but I let it pass. you know, just because, one, why call something a horn trio if you're not writing it for a horn trio? But two, the idiosyncrasies of that specific piece can only be realized by not just the horn, but the natural horn, something that Brahms wrote for, and not just the horn trio, but in his symphonies. They're all written for natural horns. It's just that modern practice wants us to perform them on valved horns and F.
Yeah.
So the amount of information that this person had was slightly more than the unaware individual who doesn't know what Brahms is, but far from the learned position of somebody who would know that Brahms was definitely writing for a horn. He was definitely writing for the horn trio with a natural horn, and it's that distance that I think uh, Milton Babbitt was talking about. That idea of saying, and in fact, he even said there are two topics which everyone feels like they are entitled to talk about, like they're experts: the arts and politics,
Yeah.
which is so true because everybody feels like they have a valid opinion about the arts, just like they have a valid opinion about public policy, which nobody except policymakers and, you know, professors of constitutional law and nobody but they have even a semblance of an idea of how policy is made, just like those of us who don't really study certain styles of music can't really go up to somebody who makes it their life work studying that style of music and say, yes, that wasn't good because X, Y, and Z. And
Yeah.
I think that that is one of the main causes of his annoyance with an audience, is not just those that don't really know about modern music, but those that think they know enough about modern music to give a critique on its value and its validity as a piece of art, which they are not qualified to do.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in there that I agree with, and I think it was one of the things, kind of going off what you mentioned about people not being an expert or even familiar with a certain area and giving value judgments on it. And it was like, I forget how the wording went, but it was, someone could just say, "Oh, I don't like it," and therefore it wasn't good, and
Mm,
consider
yeah,
that being valid, a valid criticism, which,
yeah,
um, I, yeah, I totally get that. I've experienced that from people in real interactions, just talking to people saying, "Oh, I don't like that." It was, and then, they'll go on because they're not necessarily educated about it. If you press them on it, they'll invent, reasons like, it sounds like they're trying too hard or something
yeah.
like that. Um, so I totally get that feeling too, which I don't know if that happens in other areas, but probably not as much. So trying to think of an example what that might even be.
You mean like a non-musical example, or?
Like something that's not in the arts or politics that people uneducated would just give their opinion on it or like judge it offhand. My thought kind of goes to religion and philosophy, um,
Hmm.
but I
Yeah,
don't know.
I definitely think that could be attributed to people who don't study something like different religions and yet attribute personal value based on it. Uh, my example would have been food.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
if they go to a restaurant and they eat something and they don't like it, that means it's not good,
Hmm.
or something, especially if it's from a different culture. Uh, and I definitely see in that example where there's so much information about, be it religion or food or just a cultural aspect in general, where you need to kind of learn more about it in order to first appreciate it. And then even if you don't really like it, you can always just attribute that to just it being different, not it being wrong or being incorrect.
Yeah, it's related to things that are subjective.
Hmm.
I've been thinking about this for a while, and I can't pin anything down within music or arts that I could objectively say is good or of quality,
Hmm.
um, other than some kind of vague, reference to patterns and patterns being enjoyable. And you recognize that patterns are within music and art, but not all patterns are enjoyable, um, or that significant. You can recognize a pattern in like a sound a refrigerator makes or something, or a fan,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's ultimately subjective, I think. Um,
Yeah, I've had that same experience studying form and analysis in analyzing either small pieces of music or larger pieces of music, which have a very logical construction to them, starting with motives and themes that get transformed and extrapolated on throughout the course of the music. Yes, that creates a cohesive element to the music that is very logical and very interesting to kind of piece together and pull apart, but that doesn't really validate anything as being good or not. And if anything, it has the capacity um, of invalidating something that doesn't have that. Certain styles of music are not really built on motives and themes that reoccur from time to time. Many styles, in fact, what we have in Western concert music being minimalism, that's usually not thematic in a way, which has recapitulations and developments of materials. Usually that's just one idea that is elaborated on over the course of, a whole piece. But that idea might be like timbre or a certain rhythm. So I do think that it's very difficult to validate something as of quality or good without invalidating something else as something of lesser quality or isn't good.
hmm. Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, I usually go about analyzing music in a way which says this music isn't good or bad, it just is. That is probably something that I've learned over the course of my now 9.5 years of music academia, which is
Mm,
much longer than I thought I would ever spend studying music. But it gives me that sort of indifference to not say Beethoven is phenomenal because he uses motives that are transformed in interesting ways, which is interesting. Uh, but I don't see Beethoven's use of motivic and thematic materials to be any more or less valid than the music of Duke Ellington and his use of uh, dissonant vertical harmonies and interesting timbral elements, especially with his use of brass mutes. I don't think that any one element that they have is better or worse than the other. It just is. It's all the total package. And these are, of course, both in a more westernized concert music form. Though, of course, Duke Ellington had a lot of Eastern and Latin elements in his musical style. So I think that it is hard to try and validate something as good or as artistically valid just because to say something that's good is very much an opinion, and rather it's better to just say here's a concept that they use and here's how they use it, and then to analyze that as saying okay, that's consistent and that creates this sort of effect and that's really interesting.
I think if you compare it to music as a language, and it depends on their intent and what they're trying to communicate. Styles, different styles could be like different, I guess like different languages, like English and Spanish, like, they can be related. But if you're only familiar with English and someone's speaking Spanish to you, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense. So
Yeah.
if you're not familiar with the style and the genre and the things that they do, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense or won't be easy to understand. Um, there's probably words you could pick out and things you could understand from their body language and like the way it's spoken. Um, Also thinking it in that way, no sentence is like good or bad in and of itself. It's just communicating different things,
Hmm.
and different music is communicating different things also. But yeah, I agree that if you say one thing is good, then something else would have to be not good. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's um, more like composer X is good because they use this technique. Therefore, somebody who wants to be good should use that technique.
hmm,
Um, which is not really, if you look at, or at least shouldn't be, if you look at um, analyses of Beethoven or Brahms or anything, they shouldn't give elements of opinion. They could say, here's what I think the composer is doing here. They shouldn't really say, this is good because they use these styles and these aspects of musical composition, just because, just as language uses or doesn't use certain things, so too does music of different cultures and different regions use and not use certain things. You can't really study harmony in West African percussion. That's just not how we analyze that sort of contrapuntal style that is rhythmic, uh, but has no vertical harmony. So you can't really say um, Bach is good because it has logical vertical harmony. You can note that, but by saying that Bach's musical harmonic language makes it good, it's kind of implicitly saying that styles that don't have that could not be good.
I find this just reminds me of this. That it's just a thing that I find interesting as I was I was looking at anthologies. There's documentation of 18th and 19th century Native American music and songs,
Mm,
and they make notes about how their everything is documented within Western notation system because that's what they used,
yeah.
and they make notes about how it's not really sufficient to document all the qualities of the music because it's a different culture, and there certain pitches they don't fit within equal temperament. There's like cent deviations, and um, it talks about how they have like crying songs that they use. It's really like a timbral thing where it sounds
Mm,
like they're crying a lot. Yeah, and then there's archival recordings, taking on the wax cylinders of that time, which is it's really kind of interesting to read about and hear about. It's I'm sure things got lost in translation of trying to document it within the Western notation,
yeah.
but
Yeah. And honestly, a lot got lost in translation, even in the Western world of music notation. A lot of things the um, in the Renaissance, Baroque, and even up to classical eras in performance were taught to the performer and not written down in the music. And yeah, we know how like figured bass works, but when we learn that, oh yeah, we have enharmonic equivalents where an A sharp equals a B flat, yeah, and unless you look way back and to the point where no, they were two different notes, because
yeah,
they had a concept of tuning that was based on the division of the whole note or the whole step being in nine parts, and there's um, all these idiosyncrasies that get pushed away because one, we have a tonal system now that is based on equal temperament, and two, we have a tonal system now and a pedagogical system that is based on the piano. So whatever the piano can do is what is taught to the students, and the piano can't do the uh, the microtonal intervals of which we would consider microtonal, and they also can't do like the blues note in blues and jazz where it's half between I believe the fourth and the flat five. Yeah, it can't do that, but that's how we teach it. So there's a lot lost in translation, even in our own musical trajectory, that you must even think that even that's difficult to try and codify, let alone from completely different cultures, to try and put bar lines on percussive styles of music from other cultures. They don't have that sense of bar line, because a bar line means divisions of beats and emphasis on certain parts of the meter. And that concept is, you know, it's very Western.
The idea of, separating everything with equal divisions of the octave and of the beat,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. Also, harmony and rhythm are very much related. The overtone series and different rhythm divisions and how they're related. And I think you can equate, the same ratios, like
Mm-hmm.
3-2 is a fifth, 3-2 a triplet, has, to me, the same kind of feeling that a fifth would have, a dominant rhythm to, like, leading back to, so for example, like a quarter note and then like a triplet, um,
Yeah.
eighth note triplet leading back to a quarter note would be like moving a fifth up, and then quarter note triplet back to regular quarter notes would be like a fifth down,
Mm.
kind of. And when I've analyzed like a few different scores, and I see that kind of relationship of landing on like a strong beat. It often will have that rhythm in there, the 3-2 relationship, whether it's a dotted rhythm or an actual triplet. Um, so I find that
Mm.
pretty interesting. I wonder if there's other like equal kind of comparisons you can make with other different cultures type music, with like different cultures with different tuning scales, for example, would have different common rhythms that they use. I'm not sure. I don't know, but
Yeah, I definitely find it interesting to look into that. But I can also say that that was something prevalent in Western music before the establishment of tonal structures, where when you learn about the modes, the church modes, you wouldn't really learn about the intervallic concept of the mode. Like we learn about modes mostly in terms of being relative to the major scale and having a certain collection of whole steps and half steps that create the mode. But when you were learning it 800 years ago, you would learn the shapes and the melodic contour that would accompany that mode. You would learn basically a melody to accompany the mode itself. So, in terms of ratios, I would have to really go into like, pretonal music of the medieval era, which I'm definitely not an expert on. I'll tell you,
yeah.
but I will say that there's a lot that we definitely take for granted in terms of how much is just ingrained within the natural elements of music versus what is definitely been codified in music.
Yeah, another thing, speaking to the modes and stuff, again, with when I was researching and looking at different Native American songs from the 18th, 19th century, the songs themselves, and it was often just one melody that was transcribed, looked very modal to me.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's how they thought of them. Yeah, they looked modal to me, which I think is interesting. And also, they had songs for like all their daily activities, and the songs for when they would go to battle, songs for harvest, songs for. They're basically always like singing and had songs for everything. And, these ceremonies where they would, these 7 day long or however long ceremonies where they would sing and go dance. And then, yes, it's very interesting. And that also kind of reminds me of what I've heard about ancient Greece and Rome and how they would sing and when they would be teaching about history, mathematics, or other things. I don't know. Maybe that's just like a human thing that's common within all cultures.
Yeah. And it would seem like that as well is one of the biggest elements that differentiated music of the past from this type of Western art music that sits in a concert hall where you sit in there, you act like you don't exist by not coughing, not breathing, not interrupting the music,
Yeah.
is the extrapolation of music from life, you know, because even nowadays, music is ingrained in our everyday life, be it something that we wake up to with our alarm, if we're amateur shower singers, then, or if we're singing our children a lullaby, or if we're singing in the car, there's music that's ingrained in our life that is inseparable to the mechanisms that have us go from task to task. And it's that sort of thing which has definitely been taken out of Western culture, is the idea that music is something that just everybody does all the time just to be alive. I mean, to think about that, there were two things I thought about when you're saying they have songs for when they go to bed, songs for when they go out. I was thinking first of military bugle calls, those that tell you when to get your mail, when somebody's died, when basically calls that are signals to tell the entire camp or the entire brigade. And then secondly, work songs of like the chain gang, of just things that just get you through the day,
Yeah.
uh, keeping spirits alive when things are bleak. And I think that that is one of the worst things that comes about with this sort of highly abstract music that doesn't really have a connection to our everyday lives, is that yes, we should be able to go somewhere and just focus on the music, but that's not going to happen every day. And
Hmm.
it really is happening less and less. So I think the just one of the main things that did happen is that artists said, this is my music, it's over here, and then life itself is over there, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the comparisons and everything you're saying about that. It's I feel like it's totally true. I've definitely experienced that too, going to certain, it's usually a classical music concert or a contemporary classical music concert where it has the feeling of being almost like going to a museum. It's like very sterile, you're expected to sit there and like not move and be quiet, the whole time.
Yeah.
Um, which, I mean, also on the other hand, sometimes I do just enjoy sitting and listening to music. It's different than being like at a rock concert where everyone's screaming and, maybe you miss like certain parts because of that. But, it's a different experience. I also like the atmosphere at certain rock concerts. I like the atmosphere just of sitting and listening, but not necessarily like the stuffiness that some people have. I think goes too far. Where I remember once I went and saw the San Francisco Symphony, and I was sitting next to this person, and like I like shuffled or something, like barely even audible noise, and they just like looked and like scowled, like you know, like,
Yeah.
and it's like really, like you know, is that really worth doing?
And that sort of stuffiness is really a modern phenomenon that I
Yeah.
think is part of the turn of the 20th century, which is that idea that you are not a part of the music and you are not a part of the experience.
Hmm.
When concerts happen, people talk during the music, it's even funny where if you had a multi-movement piece and the audience really liked the movement, they'd play it again. They just repeat that movement like it was just like a what do you call it, a standing ovation. uh, so the culture of really separating the audience from the music is very much a concert mentality that is very modern, and it's inflicted on music that it wasn't written for that. And I
Hmm.
definitely blame Beethoven for that. I think that And not just for the fact that everyone now is under the impression that this is a masterpiece and we need to give it the room to breathe and the room to live, but also that notion that um, new music that's created in the past 100 years isn't worth listening to. Because after Beethoven, the amount of new music that was on concerts was slowly dwindling, and
Mm,
the amount that was being put on old music was growing. And of course, now you see where the uh, the composers before the 20th century are the ones that dominate the program, especially for symphony and symphony orchestras, operas too. Um, and that I think really began with Beethoven in that sort of idea that you can't really get better than this. So
yeah,
you
yeah,
play the old pieces, and then into the 20th century, we have this idea that this thing is worth the entire world stopping in order to listen to every part of it. But whether or not you're listening or just hearing with style, that is something to really be contested.
yeah, definitely. In a way, I think commercialism is largely responsible for those things that you're saying, like, Beethoven and just, in general, like performance venues performing the same repertoire over and over and over again because it's has commercial value, what the people want, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Maybe that's tied in with the separation from the audience and the music. I'm not sure. It's definitely, I don't know if it started necessarily with Beethoven, but it definitely Milton Babbitt in his essay reaches the extreme of that sentiment, separating the music and the audience.
Especially on that note that you made on commercialism. Beethoven's been dead for almost 200 years. He's not 250 years old. He does not need a 250th birthday. He's
Yeah.
dead. He is dead. He is more dead than most composers that are on the program. So I don't know how many ways you need to celebrate whether Beethoven is was born or he died or whatever piece you focus on, like, oh, this his symphony number 9 is now 200 years old. Well, yeah, eventually everything's X amount of years old. You know, get over it, people.
Yeah.
Like, if you play Beethoven, then play Beethoven. But it's that idea of commercialism. You're celebrating the 250th birthday of the birth of Beethoven, as though you needed another reason to play Beethoven. You already do that anyways.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Yeah, it's irritating, especially if you read about how that really wasn't the case, back in whatever century. I don't know when that became really standard of playing Beethoven and all these things, a very limited repertoire.
I think for Beethoven, he's just uh, been a mainstay in the orchestral repertoire. I think for certain composers like Johann Sebastian Bach, he did need a revival. A revival. He needed somebody to revive his music and revive playing it. Mostly, I think it was Mendelssohn who edited some of his music, and then I know Brahms played a lot of his music, or had it at least studied a lot of it. I think that just like Star Wars, Beethoven is now either Beethoven is Star Wars or Star Wars is now the Beethoven of film. Is that you just have this one thing that's zero risk, and you
Mm.
say people enjoy that. Let's just do it again. Let's just make another
Yeah.
one. Let's just have another season of Beethoven. We had it before. It was terrible or not. We can't tell anymore, but it makes money and it keeps the lights on. So let's just do that. But I'd like to address one thing uh, with Milton Babbitt's article, and that's that there's not really a lot of room that he made for anyone other than in this field of music, which is Western concert music or
Mm.
European art music or whatever you want to call it. He really made room for himself to do what he wants to do, and that's pretty much it. because because we talked about Native American music and African music, and you can even talk about other cultures like Balinese music. The the connection between the music and the culture isn't inseparable. You can't have a concert of African percussion. I mean, you can, but it doesn't capture what it is. It's part of the life. Native American music was part of the life. So if you separate that from the culture, then it loses something that you can't really get back. Even if you have a program that says, "Oh, this music is meant to capture the day going by, and this one's supposed to capture this and that," it needs to either be adapted into the concert or it needs to exist in the exact circumstances where it came from. And I think that that is something that Milton Babbitt obviously doesn't really care about. I don't think he cares at all about music of other cultures. He might. I'm not. I'm not an expert on Milton Babbitt, but I'm sure he's not, John Cage or Henry Cowell and their
Yeah,
emphasis on Eastern music and philosophy.
yeah.
But I think that one of the side effects of this sort of thinking is that it gives people the ability to just say, here's music, quote unquote, and then there's everything else.
Hmm.
When in reality, it's very much a gray area, and sometimes not all music can fit into the concert realm in the way that others can.
Yeah, and even Milton Babbitt's music or music that's comes from these universities, that's a culture too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think I would agree with what I think you said is that you really can't separate it from a culture. If you did, it just has the feeling again of like being in a museum, like you're looking at, which can be cool in a way, but it's also, you're looking at something through glass, don't touch it, like don't interact with it, don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
Just just sit and observe it and be quiet and then, go home.
Yeah.
It stays in the museum, it doesn't go with you. Um, I'm not sure I exactly got what you meant when you said, I think you used the example of Native American music, but you said something like it needs to exist how it was or be adapted in some way.
Yeah. Um, what I meant is that if this sort of music has a practical purpose, be it to alert somebody or to just give a message to something within a culture,
Mm,
then it really serves itself better if it's observed in the circumstances in which it is, which is in a Native American community where it began. I'm just thinking about like Steve Reich and how he studied West African music, but he didn't just take West African drums and West African rhythms and just start pounding on them and calling it his music. He tried to adapt some of the sensibilities of West African percussion into like his early pieces like drumming in a way, and same with Balinese gamelan too. He didn't try and mimic that. He tried to adapt some of the ideas in which were in it in a way that he felt could be part of his style because he was a percussionist as well. In that regard, I think that music that is cultural needs to either exist in the culture or be assimilated into another culture where it is mixed with something else in order to have like that connection. Like Latin jazz, take Latin rhythms and maybe some Latin instruments and mix them with American and Western instruments, and you have something new, which has its foundations in both cultures, but is a new thing.
mm. Yeah, I think I got what you're saying. There's that element if you just, if you just try and imitate it, like with Hollywood or like Bollywood music, it just feels kind of inauthentic, if you
Mm.
just like, oh, there's tabla, it's Indian music now. It just, it doesn't matter that it's
Yeah,
still in 4/4 or like, common Western chord progressions. It's just like, oh, it's Indian now. It's like it's kind of like a Hollywood kind of cheesy effect that creates.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I agree with you on that. All these little songs are just like very human. I think I find them interesting. I remember there was this person that like lived in a trailer on in my old neighborhood, and he would go out and walk his dog every once in a while. So the neighborhood that I lived on, it had an industrial street kind of going into you had to drive through this industrial area going into the neighborhood, and
Mm.
he kind of parked his mobile home on that street in the industrial area. And I remember just walking down the street one time, and I hear him singing like this little song about his dog. I love my dog and she loves me. It's just, I just thought that moment was so hilarious. I like I went home later and like I transcribed it, like I wrote it out, and then I kept it like in a file somewhere, and then I used that to write a piece for later on for like a solo trumpet. It was just so, I just thought that moment was just so hilarious. It was just
Yeah.
like this is just what it is to be human, I guess.
And it
um,
seems like such a personal moment that you kind of just stumbled on. Like he
yeah,
wasn't doing it in a way which was for anybody. It's just for himself and his dog,
yeah.
whatever their name was. I actually think about um, that sort of element to somebody's music of like how personal and intimate it is, which I don't think is attributed to Beethoven. I don't think
Hmm.
any of his music is very like intimate. It's not really something that you would inflict on somebody else, you know. But somebody like Chopin, who I imagine just like sitting in his room or sitting in a very intimate salon area, either playing or improvising, that's something that to me probably should be captured within a musical performance, which would be kind of difficult if you have like a concert where the pianist is 20 feet in front of you in a large concert hall. It'd be kind of hard to get capture that sort of personal aspect of what I think of as Chopin. But with
Hmm.
Beethoven or Brahms, you kind of have to be really far away because a lot of his music is very loud and very uh, violent.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Chopin is very romantic. It feels like it was probably very intimate and personal. It's interesting when I think about that thing, the man with the dog, because it's like, did I steal this person's personal moment in his little song? I don't think of it that way. I think of it just like this was just kind of a human experience. It was a moment that he wasn't aware that I was gonna hear that and go write it down and then tell a story about him.
Yeah.
But that I'm sure happens every day. You have interactions with people at the store. They might, go tell a story about you later, and you would never know or think of them again, or even remember what they look like.
Or even more crazy if they're writers and they make a whole character based off of you and you never know it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I guess that's part of being human in the human experience.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think about in medieval Europe and stuff, and how they didn't really didn't people didn't used to like ascribe ownership to things as much. It's
Yeah.
like the people that would copy down or write pieces, even compose new like church music, wouldn't even write their name on it. Just be it just belonged to the community, I guess, or the mass, the superorganism existence.
Yeah. And now, thanks to Mickey Mouse, you not only own something for your lifetime, but then 70 years after your lifetime, and then you can sell it to some other entity, and then they own it for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, yeah, man. I wonder how long that's gonna last. It has to. I don't know. Maybe it'll go on forever. Maybe Mickey Mouse will never enter public domain. there'll be some loophole that's like perpetually created to so you can Disney can continue to make money off it forever. I don't know.
Yeah.